Hey everyone, I'm 30 minutes later today because it's just me in the studio. Laura's off on holidays, with the result that I wanted to make sure that the shop was closed before I got started. So that's why I'm a little late today. I will give you all a sec there to pop up. How are you all doing? If I look a little bit odd today, I'm testing out some contact lenses, which I haven't worn them in a very long time. Getting on okay most of the time, although anyone who is approaching middle age and wears contact lenses, you're probably aware of this problem. Normally you can take glasses off so you can see close up. With contact lenses, I am blind close up now. So if I'm up like this looking at stuff, that's the problem. But it's kind of nice to have the option to not wear them when I want to. So that's kind of fun. Hopefully, I'm going to keep an eye on the sound because the microphone I use, I know the battery's on the tail end. So if it sounds like, well, if the sound disappears, let me know. So we have had a couple of launches this week. Today, Clue 2 of our Holly Blue Knit Along went live. So anyone who is already in the club, you will have gotten an update with the club. And you're able to and so you'll have all of your new tutorial videos, and then you're also going to have some the knit along pattern. Sorry, I'm looking at stuff coming up. Elsa Louise, you're asking if I have new yarn in the shop. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the other things. I do want to make sure to talk a little bit about the knit along clue. The other thing that launched live this week was we had our Galway Blanket Club on Tuesday. The first part came out, and anyone who's actually been getting it into their hands is really enjoying the yarn. It's a very unique yarn. The actual feel of it is, it's got a firmness and a bounce that you're not going to get in a lot of typical yarns. In fact, I've had a few people say that it's quite different to any yarn they've worked with before. It is fantastic for cables. It's not, where are we? It's going to be back here. It is not the most super soft yarn in the world, but it does have the most crisp stitch definition you've ever seen. So this one, it just says Galluv. Galluv is the Irish for Galway, as this is the Irish yarn. And we put a little booklet together as well, which just gave the story of the development of the yarn and all about the Galway wool and the Irish. So anyone who's in the club will have gotten the wool and the pattern, and then each of the sections are coming out. If you didn't join the Galway project, because I know it was a fairly limited one, the end of the summer, coming into the autumn, it will be available as pattern and a workshop as well. So it is going to be available, just not in the current format. So if any of you are out there and working on our knit along, give us a shout out. Clue 2 is the body. So we're now getting started working on the body, and it's not up in the shop yet, but I in fact just got some knitted barber cords because I've had so many people go on about finding them extremely useful. Hey from Newfoundland. When we're working on this, so we had a couple of videos during the week where I was showing how you can remove the sleeves, and when you remove the sleeves you want to check the length of it first of all. What I do is I will usually slip half of the stitches onto a second needle, and then you can stretch it out and you can try it on. Because of course if you don't do that, there's just no way to try something on easily. You've got some hope with the cardigan because you can kind of put it like this, but if you've got a sweater you can't do it. So second needle, that's the same size or smaller, works really well. Alternatively, if you've got waste yarn, you can slip it onto waste yarn. Oh, we've got someone in Chile as well here today. Good morning. Waste yarn, the reason I don't like waste yarn is that it adds a lot of extra time because you have to thread it obviously onto a darning needle, slide the stitches onto the waste yarn, but then when you're finished you have to put them all back on a needle to work again. With something like this where you've got two knitting needles, you can just knit straight off it. The barber cord does have the advantage that because it sticks it, the tube is, it's a silicone tube, a really tiny one, and you push it onto the top of your knitting needle, and then you slip the stitches over to it so that you've got them half between the barber cord and half of them on the knitting needle so you can stretch it out. when you're finished, then because it's effectively an extension of your knitting needle, you can actually slide them back onto your knitting needle. You can also use it instead of, you know, when you actually take the sleeves off and you put them in waste yarn, you can use the barber cord for that case as well. And so again, you can stick it onto the end. When we get them up in the shop, I'll make sure to put up a few videos on how to use them, because it means that, yeah, basically it can be a very fast way of being able to make sure you try it on. And I am such a big believer in trying on your top-down knits as you work, that anything that makes it easier is a win in my book, is the best way of putting it. So we had a little bit of discussion during the week as well about what you do when you try it on, because sometimes, you know, you hear everyone say it's like, oh, make sure you try your knits on, make sure you try your knits on. But if you haven't done it before, you might go, well, what exactly am I measuring? And it's going to depend on the different parts that you're at. So when I'm working this top down, before I remove my sleeves, I will always try it on. So when you try it on and you don't want it all the way to join in the sleeves, what you want is it should fit just a little bit under your armhole, so that when you cast on the underarm sleeves, they will join across here. If you sit this where you want the neck to sit and it's still sitting away up here, you know your yoke depth is too narrow or too shallow and you need to work a little bit longer. If it's hanging way down here, you know it's too long and you're going to need to adjust. So that is the first thing that you're going to want to try and do when you're trying on your yoke of your sweater, to make sure that it's around about the depth. It's not going to be perfect, but it gives you a fairly good ballpark. The next thing you will see is when you try it on, if you're worried about it actually not fitting around, you can do a very light steam. So if you've got a steamer or an iron, hold it over your work. Don't ever touch it off, but hold it over your work to relax the stitches out and kind of uncurl the bottom of it. And then that you can put it on and see how it fits. So if it is really huge, you're going to see it very easily. If it's miles too tight, you'll see it. Like, you're not going to get the nuances of it with it, but you're going to have the big blocks, basically. If it's really big or really small, you're going to see that very clearly when you try it on. You will have a space, obviously. These the button bands, front bands, are going to be picked up afterwards and worked. So there will be, I don't know offhand, I think it's about, you have it in the actual schematic. I think it's 1.25 inches, or maybe it's 1.5 inches width in these, or maybe it's just 1 inch. It's in the schematic, it'll say how wide it is. So there is going to be a little bit of a gap. So if you're a little worried that it doesn't seem quite right, if that's all you need, then you're going to have that. So they're the kind of things you're going to look at when you look at the top part. When you know yoke length is the size you want and you're ready to go get started on the body, you're also going to try it on after you take the sleeves off, because you're going to knit down straight to just below the bust line. So in the video I had posted up, you can see that I'm trying it on and I'm checking if the length is coming to just about below the bust line. For what we're doing, it's A-line, so there's increases down the side on each side here and down the side here. Very slowly, it's not a very aggressive A-line. Increases very, very slowly coming down. You want to make sure that doesn't start until below the fullest bust point, because you want it fairly fitted at the bust, and then after that you're going to start increasing very slowly. Oh, I had something popped up here. The button band is 1 inch wide. So that's kind of what it looked like to me here. So thank you very much for confirming. So you're going to have 1 more inch width than what you are going to try on as you're trying it on, because you will have that. And that is actually a nice thing about doing the front bands afterwards, is if you're a little bit off and if you feel like I actually need a small bit more snugness, or you're like, I don't want it any bigger, you can change the button bands. So you could do an I-cord edging that's going to be like, will basically overlap the front of it and give no button bands if you feel it's too big. Or alternatively, if you're like, I need about an extra inch, you could maybe make that 2 inches rather than 1. So you've got a little bit of leeway with those front bands to be able to adjust it as you go along. The A-line shaping increases very slowly as you go down on the sides. If you want it more aggressive, if you've got very wide hips and you want it wider, you can add more increases as you go down, no bother at all. They stop before we reach, let me move this up here. You may not have been able to see this very clearly on the pattern, but down here we've just got one little motif here, which is what I call the body motif, and it's just a small little repeat of the stitch pattern just at the bottom left. I've just done it on one side. You could add it to both if you want, or leave it off. Someone's asking, is the one I made with the A-line shaping? Yes, there's A-line shaping with this, and you can see it's very, very subtle. It's not aggressive. It doesn't look like it goes out very wide. It just increases very, very slowly. If you're straighter, you can omit that, just leave it off, and everything else is going to be the same. If you like something with a bit more curves, I haven't put the measurements in, but what I have done is I've told you how you would do it. So if you like something where it comes in at the waist and out again, when you go past the fullest bust point on the sides, you can just do a few decreases down to where your waist would be. So you'll need to try it on and you need to figure out the rows, and then you do a little bit straight, and then you can start doing the increases if you wanted to come in and go out. I have definitely started veering towards very gentle A-line shaping for my clothing now. I find that it's more comfortable to wear, it's easier to throw over things, and I just find it a lot more versatile. And you do have to be careful though with A-line shaping that the bust fits fairly well. You don't want it too oversized, because then you can end up with a very large. But if you keep the bust a little bit better fitted and then you start your increases afterwards, it works quite well. Liz, you're thinking of doing the motif on both sides. Yeah, it would work absolutely perfectly. Just make sure that you've got the same number of stitches along the edge. So again, whatever number of stitches you start before the motif, because of course it's at the beginning of the row here, so you've got a certain number of stitches, your motif, and then the end. Just do the other one over here, but finish with that number of stitches and the motif before that, and it should work perfectly. I didn't want it all the way around because I felt it was just too much, but I just wanted to add a small little dot to kind of pick up what's happening up on the yoke as well. If you opt to leave it out, that is no problem. It'll work just fine with the body in plain stockinette stitch. And do drop down to a smaller needle size for your ribbing, because when you drop down to a smaller needle size, you've got two benefits. One, it's going to make it a little snugger and a bit less likely to stretch out. And the second thing is it actually helps prevent the edge rolling a little bit when you drop down the needle size. It makes it a little bit flatter as you're working. So generally speaking, with edges and things like this, I will frequently drop down a needle size, because it all just behaves itself that much better when you drop down the size. Now, in terms of the length, if you want to adjust the length, it's no problem at all. If you make it shorter, and you still want the same amount of increases, you might want to space them a bit closer together. If you want to make it longer, you may perhaps add one more increase in, so that you don't have your increases stopping up here and then you're going down a bit further. When you are increasing, if you're adding or decreasing the length of your sweater, the only impacts you're going to see are, one, if you increase the length, it is going to use more yarn. Make sure you have more yarn if you do that. And the other thing is, if you increase it, the number of stitches you'll have for the front, this over here, the front band's going to be longer. So if you add an extra 2 inches, for instance, then you're going to make sure you pick up 2 inches worth of stitches extra. Don't worry too much when we get to that about the actual, how many stitches are there and all the rest of it. If you go by a ratio and then you put in your buttons as you're going through, you can make sure that you keep it nice and regular. And we've got the motif will save us from stock and stitch boredom. Exactly. You may have noticed why I ended adding it in when you reach the bottom point there and I had finished the increases. I'm like, just need to jazz it up a little bit, keep myself interested in something just a small bit different. And I also like to give options. So by putting it in but saying that it's optional, it does open up the possibility for you of seeing what it looks like and then being able to decide whether you want to put it in or whether you want to leave it out, because all of these things are basically, they're completely optional, because I love doing that with garments, giving people as many options as possible, possibilities, and then if you do make the changes, thinking about what kind of a knock-on effect it's going to have as you move forward. So it's by having those in place, it means that if you do decide to make that change, you know what kind of implications it will have. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means that you need to be aware in the next step in the process of what's going to happen when you make that change. So it just makes it more fun. I think I'm a big believer in modifying sweaters so that they suit you, whether it's the yarn color or the length of the sleeves or the body or changing the waist shaping. All of these are very controllable, and when you can try it on, you can make sure that it's exactly what you want it to be. So you don't have, there's no guesswork involved. You get to say, I think this is what I want, try it on, and you can be sure that the end product is what you want. Now, if you have any other questions as we're going through here or after I post it up, just again, pop them up in the comments, or if there's something that you think, oh, I don't really know how I'm going to do that, just put it in here. Oh, the other option for the body that I didn't really mention is straight down. Like I've talked about how you can decrease it for the waist and increase, but you can actually decide to not put any increases in, particularly if your body shape is very straight up and down and that's the style you want, then you could go do that. One thing that I haven't put in is it could also even be quite fun as a crop cardigan. Like, let me pull this up over here. This is a fairly long cardigan, but if you actually just brought it down to this length, it could actually be a lot of fun. I think it could be gorgeous as a crop length. But if you were doing that, you wouldn't add any increases, and you'd probably omit the little motif as well on the end. God, it always makes me want to add in a little, to do a small variant on it, but in a cropped version. So you can see when I'm designing how hard it is to decide to just go with one option, because all of these things open up in my head and I'm like, oh, I could do this or I could do that. But when you're putting it down the pattern, you have to commit and say, this is what it's going to be. But those options are still available to you if you would rather one of those. Elsa Louise, you were asking me about new yarns. We're kind of slowly starting to work our way into a few new summer yarns as the summer's coming up. Over the next few weeks, we'll announce a small bit more about that as they come up, and kind of give ideas for where you'd use them and why I like to use different yarns in the summer, or what ones I do like to use. But that's going to be coming up over the next few weeks. Next week, I will not be here. We've got the Enterprise Awards up in Dublin, so this time next week, I'll be attempting to get dressed in high heels and sequins. So I will make sure to post you a photograph so that you can all partake in it. Elsa Louise linen yarn, there will be some linen yarn, there will be some silk yarn, there'll be all sorts of yummy yarns coming up for the summer, so keep your eyes peeled. We will also have something particularly summery coming up at the end of next week, so watch out on social next week for some hints about it, and there'll be something very special coming up at the end of next week that I am looking forward to sharing with you. And I've been doing some knitting experiments with it, and it should be a lot of fun for you to knit, I think, and learn some new things. I definitely enjoyed the process of creating it, so keep an eye out. Thank you very much for all the luck for next week. At this point, I'm looking forward to the night. It should be a good evening out, and we learned a ton over the process of it. A lot of business stuff that I had not pulled together before, so it was a fairly steep learning curve. Well worth the time, but more work than I'd anticipated. But thank you all for your good wishes, and I will see you all in 2 weeks' time before my holidays. Woohoo! Don't you just love the summertime? Bye, everyone.